I'm Ben Sawyer, and this is The Road to Now. It is now officially the Christmas season, Thanksgiving being over with. Did you hear me? Now that Thanksgiving's over with, it's Christmas season. And this is our 9th Christmas at The Road to Now, and it's getting to be like a tradition here. We air some of our favorite Christmas episodes over the holidays. A lot of times Bob and I get busy, and we like sharing these episodes. And it's to the point now where, it's weird, but to me, re-airing these episodes is like a holiday tradition. But today, one that we have not aired in a few years, actually, it's our conversation with Bruce Carlson. This is from back, I think, in 2019. It's called America's First War on Christmas. And it's really just about the battles of Princeton and Trenton, the crossing of the Delaware on December 25th, 1776. What a brilliant move that was. And so we hope you enjoy it today. A good reminder for everybody, Ken Burns' American Revolution series is out now. Go check that out if you want a pretty epic, really visual guide to what this looked like. But for now, we hope you guys enjoy this. Bruce Carlson, of course, of My History Can Beat Up Your Politics, good friend of the show. Hope you guys are having a good time. Hope you made it there and back again safely. And we look forward to seeing you next week. Take care. Bruce Carlson, historian extraordinaire, host of My History Can Beat Up Your Politics. It's very much an honor to have you back again.
Bruce, real quick, let me ask you, how long has your show been on?
My History Can Beat Up Your Politics has been a podcast since 2006. You know, there were podcasts around before me, but not too many.
We are talking with a pioneer. This episode is the first war on Christmas.
That's right. The first time that America had a war on Christmas.
War.
December 25th, 1776.
War. Take that, Christmas. It was certainly war took over Christmas. War didn't care about Christmas. Certainly, it was no year for a Christmas, let's just say.
The Continental Army, and we'll get into this.
Yeah.
The Continental Army was defeated. They were demoralized. Mm-hmm. People were leaving every day. Mm-hmm. They were down to 2,400 men. Right, Bruce? Is that right? 2,400 men at the time of the...
that's Washington's army, but he has two other divisions. What would you say? So it's about 4,000. But you're right in that it's just a really a terrible situation for the army. It's been in an attempt to protect New York City and block New York City from the takeover by the British and deny the British a base. Washington was routed, defeated, was chased through Manhattan and then up through Harlem, crossed the Hudson River at Fort Lee. In pursuit were the British every step of the way, crosses through various towns in New Jersey, including where young Bruce Carlson was born and raised in Bergen County, New Jersey, then also Bergen County, Dutch settlements around there, and chased throughout New Jersey. And, very precarious situation. You also had the enlistments were about to come up. They would be up in the end of the year. It just didn't look good. And, one thing I had only realized reading about it recently is that they had no idea how long they were going to have to retreat. We know now where it's going to go, and it's just going to be through the state of New Jersey to Pennsylvania. But at the time, Washington's thinking that, gosh, we may have to go all the way to Virginia. And it's like, I know at least the Alleghenies will protect me in my home state. But you could imagine the situation, the revolution. It already was bad, and it would have been worse. The Continental Congress, which is running everything in the revolution, has to retreat to Baltimore because they don't feel safe. They don't feel like the Continental Army is going to protect them in this particular battle. It's just a bad situation all around that we find our revolution in.
It's also an interesting time, I think, when you look at what's going on, because early on, and you see this, we have to remember that the American Revolution was in many senses a civil war. So it's not like all the people in the colonies were against all the people from England. I mean, the people that, some estimates, it's like a third of the population remains totally loyal to the crown throughout this. So there's all dealing with the fact that you don't know who your friends and foes are. There's spies everywhere as you are running, and information is crucial. But it's I think the fascinating thing here is that the British can never figure out how to win this war, but Washington knows if he can just run and not get caught and keep the British away, particularly away from the Navy, then he'll be able to essentially stretch this war out. After 1776, the greatest thing that Washington has pulled off is escaping time and time again. That on December 25th, 1776, he decides it's time to take the offensive.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at it, Washington has not won a battle. He's been appointed the commander, but when he was appointed, that's when the Continentals were winning, driving the British out of Boston. Yeah, he was the commander for a few days of that or so, but that was largely Horatio Gates and others who had commanded the forces there in Massachusetts that drove the British out of Boston.
Knox.
And Knox and others. And so you have Washington appointed through a political process, really, right? Through the Continental Congress. And politics is driving this revolution. I know I'm the history and politics guy. Got to bring it up. Politics is present all through the many years of this very long war of the American Revolution. History, we tend to remember like maybe Trenton, Washington crossing the Delaware, and then like, boom, it's Yorktown. No, it was an extremely large war. And one of the reasons is just because what Ben was talking about, that the British pretty much could pick the seaports that they wanted because of their large navy and bombard American cities. They bombarded the whaling town of New Bedford. They bombarded Norfolk. They bombarded Newport, Rhode Island. They took New York City, as we talked about earlier. They could pick and choose seaports. It was in the country where, Washington, and the Americans could fight it out. But it still makes for a tough war when your opponent can land troops anywhere, basically, and restart the war in different places. It's like a 18th century hyperspace that the British were able to use at any time. And it was hard for the Americans to keep up. And that's what you have here.
So as the British were chasing Washington through New Jersey, they weren't just the British soldiers. They had Hessian forces, right? Were the bulk of the army in pursuit of Washington?
It's a big contingent of the Americans, in a sense, were fighting not just British redcoats, as you hear, but also tens of thousands of German mercenaries. Principally from a principality called Hesse-Kassel, and they're mercenaries. Now, I want to talk a bit about that because that term gets thrown around that could lead to a misunderstanding. They're not mercenaries in the sense of, hey, we pay these Germans, and if you pay them a little more, they'll fight for you. And then, no, it's a long-standing deal with the British Empire. And obviously, King George III has German roots. His grandfather came right from Germany and was speaking German. So he's still the Elector of Hanover, and he pulls troops from there, which frees up British troops, but to come to America. But it's not enough. The British simply don't have enough men to really wage a war in North America while they're a large empire with needs all around the world. So there's standing deals where, and it goes a lot of different ways. The British have their Scottish regiments in Holland, doing the same thing. They're also mercenaries. So, and those are attempted to pull out. They've been there for 200 years, and they have to pull them out for this emergency. George III is scrambling. So he goes to his friends, the Germans, in the Principality of Hesse-Kassel. There's also other parts of Germany where they all get called Hessians because of that one principality, and that is the main one. But they're not all from there. But it is a place. It's about 275,000 people. And their business, they can't really farm very well in this little land, and their business is killing. And they're making a killing. No, I mean, their business is recruiting soldiers, and they're very well trained. And the prince is there training every day along with them. It is the thing you do in Hesse-Kassel. The thing you do is train and drill and become, and they're excellent soldiers. But the reason I wanted to bring all that up is that there's a long-standing connection to the British Empire. It's misunderstood that these guys are just like for the day mercenaries. They're like for the century mercenaries. There's a strong connection to their prince, and when they go to American fight, they're just as much of a call to honor and not to be to be dishonored as any other, as the Redcoats or as the Americans as well. They are, in a sense, fighting for their country, too, even though they're on a foreign soil. But they are the principal and the very good, probably the best troops of His Majesty's contingent in New Jersey right now.
Well, I think one thing to add here as well is, and that was great. I love that rundown there because it does get overly simplified because they're mercenaries. But it goes back to like this notion of like taking our modern expectations of why people fight and kind of just pasting it over the past. Because the reality is this is not the era of nationalism. This is not a time when people who are fighting for this like divine cause or like their sense of home or nation in the same way that later on becomes the way that people fight. And that is, I think what's fascinating here is that the Hessians, they fight and they have honor, but they're not fighting for the honor. Like they're not fighting like for their country, right? Like in the same way that we think about people signing up to go off to fight. The Redcoats, by and large, aren't fighting in that sense, right? A lot of them are fighting because they were destitute and it was a job, right? And they have codes of honor, but they're not out there. I will give my life for my country in the way that we think of soldiers now. And that's what I think is fascinating about Washington and his men, because sure, most of them don't have that ingrained in them. And as Washington himself pointed out in a letter that he wrote a couple months before Delaware, we are now, as it were, upon the eve of another dissolution of our army. The remembrance of the difficulties which happened upon that occasion last year, the consequences which might have followed the change if proper advantages had been taken by the enemy, added to a knowledge of the present temper and situation of the troops, reflect but a very gloomy prospect upon the appearance of things now, and satisfy me, beyond the possibility of doubt, that unless some speedy and effectual measures are adopted by Congress, our cause will be lost. It is in vain to expect that any, or more than a trifling part of this army will again engage in the service on the encouragement offered by Congress. When men find that their townsmen and companions are receiving $20, $30, and more dollars for a few months' service, which is truly the case, it cannot be expected without using compulsion, and to force them into the service would answer no valuable purpose. When men are irritated and the passions inflamed, they fly hastily and cheerfully to arms. But after the first emotions are over, to expect among such people as compromise the bulk of an army, that they are influenced by any other principle than those of interest, is to look for what never did, and I fear never will happen. The Congress will deceive themselves, therefore, if they expect it. A soldier reasoned with upon the goodness of the cause he is engaged in, and the inestimable rights he is contending for, hears you with patience, and acknowledges the truth of your observations, but adds that it is of no more importance to him than others. The officer makes you the same reply, with this further remark, that his pay will not support him, and he cannot ruin himself and family to serve his country when every member of the community is equally interested and benefited by his labors. The few, therefore, who act upon principles of disinterestedness are, comparatively speaking, no more than a drop in the ocean. George Washington to the President of Congress, September 24th, 1776. You can't eat patriotism. You can't eat anger. You got to feed people. But that's why I think it's so brilliant that Washington is really one of the first people to think this way. And as they're at this moment where they've been defeated, where he's trying to keep people on board, Thomas Paine publishes one of the most famous tracts, lines that you've heard before that you might have not known where they come from. These are the times that try men's souls. He publishes this, and Washington has it read out. And this captures the element that I think is different about what Washington, is, at least Washington for sure, but at least some of his men also have that the British don't have. And this is a deep loyalty to this revolution. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country. But he that stands by it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered, yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. What we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. It is dearness only that gives everything its value. Thomas Paine, December 1776.
So, Bruce, at play on the side of the Continentals in New Jersey, there were also some autonomous actors, right? The Hunterdon men and Ewing's men, and there were these militias at play. Could you talk about those actors for a second?
Yeah, I think it's really important that you note for the whole story and what's going to happen afterwards, too, that's going to determine the whole revolution. It's not just because Bob, you and I are originally Jersey people. It's not out of that pride that I say this, but this war was fought in New Jersey. The Revolution was fought in New Jersey. Some of the most essential battles from all, going from Trenton all the way to Monmouth were in New Jersey. But you had the Jersey militia, and throughout this campaign, the Jersey militia was continuing. So we discussed, Washington's in retreat. He goes to Newtown, Pennsylvania. The British are on his heels. They elect, not to pursue quickly enough. They also, Washington's able to get the boats so that they cannot find boats to cross the river to pursue him. So he's there in Pennsylvania. The British decide to keep the Hessians with Johann Rall, an old commander who goes back to, he was used as a mercenary to fight Scottish rebellions, a Jacobite rising in the 1740s. He goes way back. He's been a soldier for 30 years. He's commanding this unit. They put him at Trenton with about 1,500 Hessians. There's other Hessian troops and other British troops, but the main force sort of stays back and doesn't expect anything from the Americans. But while this is...
So hold on, Bruce.
Yeah.
Bruce, but didn't Howe kind of say we're done for the year?
Yeah, I think that they didn't expect much from Washington, and, they... And
they didn't like to fight in the cold.
It's enormously difficult to do operations in the cold, and
you say that like I don't want to fight when it's cold outside.
No, but
not like when it rains, we can't drag these cannon through the mush, and the people get frostbite and they don't have shoes and their feet fall off. And
when you read the David McCullough 1776, he makes it sound like Clinton and Howe were like, well, it's the end of the fighting season. We'll take a couple months off. We got them where we want them.
And and I think there is definitely a lethargy to the Howe brothers, no doubt. They were Whigs. They were not originally for the suppressing of the Americans, but of course, when called to duty by His Majesty, they did it. Howe is one of these people who are going to extend a lot of olive branches in this same year. But you also have to consider that it's dangerous to fight in winter, even if you have the advantage. There's certain things that aren't going to work as well. Also, and we alluded to it a little bit earlier. The Jersey countryside was not friendly. I got to give it to my Jersey folks from the 18th century. They never made it a friendly place for any garrison, Hessian or not, but particularly Hessians who they didn't like. And they were harassing the barracks and harassing the patrols that both the British and the Hessians had in New Jersey. They never wanted to make them comfortable. Washington, throughout this war, really, and this early part of the war, even when you get to Valley Forge in the next year, you have to understand that it was never about, there's a retreating going on, but they also wanted to contest the country.
And so now Washington, facing the fact that he's done nothing but lose, facing the fact that all these men who are going to have to camp for the winter, a lot of them, their enlistments are up. They're thinking about what's happening to their families back home. Was someone there to help their wives bring in the crop? Are there children there? The British could be in your town. They find out that you're down there, and suddenly your house is burned down. That's all in your head. And bolstering that may be a love of country, but it's also nothing but knowing defeat for the previous 3 months and having no reason to think you'll see anything else once it gets warmer.
Hey, Ben, how about this? A third of the colonists were for the revolution. A third of them wanted to stay with the crown. And a third of them were with whoever was winning.
Meh.
What do you think, Bruce?
Meh.
What do you think, Bruce?
Often cited, but that was a misquoted John Adams. But I put it more 2/3 support, more for the revolution, as I think we'll see. If you go to a place like New England, that third and a third and a third is no way. It's almost 2/3. We are operating in areas, Jersey and Pennsylvania, where that might really apply, where you have Quakers and other people like, we don't want any part of this revolution. There's a story in the pension records that where the Scotch-Irish fella who's an indentured servant, he goes to his Quaker master, and the master's like, well, I bet you want to lead the horse team to go help the Americans. And he said, absolutely, I want to help them. Quaker grabs the whip, and instead of whipping the horses, whips him and says, you're a rebel. You rebelled back at home against the British, and now you want to rebel again. And, of course, it didn't stop him from doing that, but you see the differences. You had like your Scots-Irish, which were mostly for the Revolution. German-Americans, again, not the Hessians who were here, but the Germans who had settled here for a century, mostly for independence. Most groups were for independence. I think that third is a little bit undercounting, but you are correct that things are waning a bit, hence the Sunshine Patriot thing. And even George Washington writes to his brother, maybe the game is up. It doesn't mean, even if people support the revolution, that the thing is going to continue or that you can have a continental war. You might have Fortress New England up there, and New England is supplying everything. And a lot of what we're going to talk about today is a lot of the army that Washington has is led by New Englanders, funded and fed by New Englanders. But it's a dire situation. Johann Rall says these guys are a bunch of country clowns. And you know the German word for clown? It's clown.
Hey.
So he literally says these clowns, and it's a silly thing to say. And George Washington is well schooled. We find later that George Washington has these military manuals that say, do the unexpected, do something crazy, attack your opponent in a storm. It's a huge advantage. And so we know what he's thinking. And the Hessians are exactly the reverse. They're not going to attack us. But if they do, I mean, look, we're getting sniped at by the Jersey militia anyway. We're ready. When we hear shots, my men will be able to respond for the bulk of my men in Trenton. He does put out patrols. This is kind of a mistaken thing that he didn't have any patrols. He does have patrols around Trenton, which is now a semi-important place, city. It's the biggest city in the west part of Jersey. It's about 130 buildings. Good place for an army. The residents there, like you say, are probably, in that third where they're not quite sure. Some of them are hosting the Hessians. Others are going to end up firing on them. Hessians are not the most popular people in the Americas right now. Even among some of the loyalists, it's like, really? You had to bring them? You couldn't bring the redcoats we thought you were going to send? So Washington concocts a plan, and really, as Ben said, he literally says it's victory or die. I think you should think about that for a second, by the way. If Washington can't do something, and there's all kind of politics happening with the Continental Congress, they already had to flee for their safety. They're starting to talk about this Washington guy. Should he be the general? You also have to think about, when you say victory or die, the British had a lot of kind hearts and amnesty proposals. There was the Hessians and the British floated an amnesty proposal in New Jersey, like if you sign a loyalty, you'll be okay. That doesn't mean that after they had quelched the revolution, there wouldn't be serious investigations and perhaps hunting down and taking of assets and locking up of anybody who had anything to do with it. Maybe because of Washington's position, he might have been all right, but the others? So when we say victory or die, these men in the Continental Army right now have made a real choice.
The British were not kind to those who they convicted of turning against the empire. Like, I remember one account. Here's the text of the actual law that was on the books until 1870. The law allowed that, quote, "You be drawn on a hurdle to the place of execution, where you shall be hanged by the neck, and being alive cut down. Your privy members shall be cut off, and your bowels taken out and burned before you, your head severed from your body, and your body divided into 4 quarters to be disposed of at the king's pleasure."
Oof. I mean, that's
so
cruel and unusual punishments were okay. We didn't have a constitution yet.
I know that's what this is another point. So many of those amendments where you look at them and you're like, quartering troops, cruel and unusual punishment. Like the first 10 amendments are like a checklist of everything that happened to the colonists like during the Revolution, and they're like, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. It's when you start reading the history, you start going, oh yeah, and that's where that came from. That's where that came from. It's amazing.
So, Bruce, you talked about Colonel Rall. What about Colonel Von Dunnup? He and Rall didn't get along very well. And Von Dunnup was supposed to be in Bordentown at the ready because they did believe an attack was coming. Right, Bruce?
It's mixed. There's mixed accounts of that. There are Pennsylvania loyalists that are telling them there's tremendous movement going on here. A lot of historians now say that just what we were talking about earlier, the 100 men, the Jersey militia, kept attacking them, and that kept them both on their toes in a way, but also complacent, because when they started hearing some firing, it was like, oh, that's just the darn Jersey militia again, country clowns and all that. It's not like they totally discounted American attack. They just probably didn't think it would be on Christmas, not during a storm. And then also thought it was not likely.
Ron Chernow's biography of Washington, which is a masterpiece, he actually says that the Hessians at Trenton had received some news that Washington and his men were attacking, and they just kind of wrote it off like, okay, they're probably not, but if they are, who cares? They suck. I mean, that's not his words, but that's the way he depicts it.
I'd like to reference David Hackett Fisher and his book, Washington's Crossing. And he tells the story of there were these small militia bands, and Washington wasn't really connected to a lot of these guys. These guys were working on their own. They were causing the Hessians a lot of annoyance. And see, the Hessians, they were exhausted and tired from like these daily skirmishes that were more like swatting a fly.
Shooting at the patrols.
Yeah, like little tic-tac stuff, like jumping out of the woods, shooting, jumping back in the woods.
You can't sleep at night anymore. You don't want to do the pickets. It led Rawl to have less pickets because picket work was hard.
So Von Dunnup, he's staying in Mount Holly, and he met a lovely lady there. And so he wanted to stay with her, a widow. Her last name was Ross. And David Hackett Fisher goes to the extent of speculating that this was Betsy Ross.
Well, Fisher's the best on this, so it's possible. But I love that. That's just like love, exciting and new. Well, let's, if we don't mind, let's hit with what Washington's planning here. He has some experience with the British Army, and he wants to do a three-prong attack. So his force is going to come south. He's going to cross from McConkey's Ferry, which is about 10 miles from Trenton. That's where his main army, that's the 2,400 that Washington has. Then he's going to have a local Pennsylvania group that's going to cross the ferry and also attack and hold off any British force that might be there. And then also have Cadwalder's, Rhode Islander, also has troops that will attack in a three-pronged plan. They want to hit on Christmas night while they're not ready.
While they're drinking, playing cards.
Tired from all their kids running around with their new Christmas presents.
Oh, my God. They had to go to 4 different relatives' houses. They had to drive 3 hours away and hit 4 different relatives' houses. And their kids, by the end of the day, they just can't take it. They just like start crying and just have come-aparts to no end. Yeah.
So that's the time to hit them. I mean, they're already down. You know what I'm saying?
That's right. So Washington comes up with this complicated plan. He needed these boats to cross the Delaware. Where did he get these boats from?
They send word up and down. And when we think about the support that may or may not have been for the revolution in the country, you have to think about this. You know, they were able to procure almost every boat that was available on the Delaware. But mostly you're getting these Durham boats from McConkey's Ferry, which is, you know, it's also a place, there's a tavern there, and they dine there the night before the attack. These are large boats that would be used to, you know, because sometimes if you look at that painting, and the painting's from the 1850s, and, you know, it shows Washington in this relatively small boat standing on it while everyone's sitting down. These are large boats that are used normally to transport pig iron. And pig iron is going to come from South Jersey, you know, the Pine Barrens, and go to the Pennsylvania foundries and back and forth and things. They're large boats, and generally you would actually, everyone would be standing in them and would be somewhat protected from the water. It's actually not something where you see the person that much in the boat as a painting might depict. And the ferry operation is sort of supervised by Henry Knox, who's this big and commanding figure, but also with the expertise of John Glover and his units from Marblehead, Massachusetts. This is a whaling town, a fishing town, and it really goes to show you the continental effort that goes in here. It's not just like the New Jersey militia, the Virginia general in Washington, the Rhode Island generals, the Connecticut, you know, John Sullivan and others, the New York and Alexander Hamilton and his skill. It's a real continental effort. You have these Massachusetts seafarers leading Pennsylvania boats across the river and utilizing their expertise, which was sorely needed because conditions are bad. I mean, you're talking about when they launched the crossing. First of all, you know, they think it's just going to take a few hours or so, but the conditions are horrid. And it's going to take much longer to get everybody, first of all, down to the crossing point and to where they need to go. There's a horrific storm.
Right. Talk about this storm. It's like a nor'easter, and there was no way to know it was coming, right?
No way to know it was coming. They knew that they didn't have the kind of weather prediction, obviously, that we have. They knew it was December. They knew it was a possibility, but it was almost like it couldn't be worse that the storm hit on this day when they're on Christmas when they're planning this attack. This is what one officer says: "Snow is worse than planned. The wind is northeast and beats in the faces of the men. It will be a terrible night for those without shoes," because many of these men, can you imagine? We're sitting here in our warm studios and everything like that. Can you imagine we're marching with no shoes? Some have old rags around their feet, but I have not heard a man complain. And that's what you're dealing with right there. That's when I like talking about the revolution, especially when we get into discussions of American politics and everything, and people have their complaints about today or what have you. And it's like, I love going to the American Revolution because you see the absolute sacrifice. It's a war that's often depicted in paintings and things, but it was an awful, brutal war that was horrible for many people fighting it, whatever their motivations and however good the outcome.
And you mentioned Henry Knox. And Henry Knox, he was transporting artillery, cannons.
That's right.
Across the river.
That's right. They had to get about 16 cannon across the river, which is not an easy thing. This horrible storm. And also, the river had frozen but had broken, so you have these large flows of ice. This is extremely dangerous because what you've got to do is not only oar and row on the boat, but also you've got to push and make sure that these flows, first of all, you have to remove the obstruction and while, the wind and the storm is coming down on you, and also try to keep it from the boat because it's possible that one of these flows could break the boat, could put a hole in the boat. So it's it was an arduous task. It took a very long time, much longer. Henry Knox is supervising this. Washington is also supervising. There's accounts of seeing him on the side, encouraging men to go forward, and watching the transfer of men and cannon.
So on the one hand, the storm makes everything dreadfully difficult and more complex and very uncomfortable. On the other hand, the storm provides cover for the army.
That's true, because another element that we hadn't discussed is you have to think about you're crossing men and as you're these heavy cannons across in these, while they're good boats, the best that could be had at that time, and they had transported iron in the past, it's a very difficult conditions. If you're noisy, if you're allowing muskets to fire, if you're making too much noise, loyalists. We talked about how many loyalists. I've always said it's not like overwhelming in this area. Your West Jersey was a little more of a patriot-ish area. On the Pennsylvania side, though, there were loyalists, and all you need is one to get through and warn. And now you have, and the Hessians were known for their Jaegers, their riflemen that could snipe, and if now what you might have a situation if they were warned is they're sniping on the river and you're sitting ducks. So yes, it also, the storm in a way also helped to protect and keep the operation quiet, and also just increase the chances that the Hessians would say, oh, there's no way that they're doing this.
So meanwhile, back at the fort, back in Trenton, Washington wants to have everybody crossed by midnight. But due to the complications, things just not going the way you planned, the storm, he gets everybody across at 3 a.m.
Right.
So that kills the attack in the darkness. They don't attack until the sun comes up, correct?
Yeah, and also it takes time because they're still a distance from Trenton. They have to march in New Jersey a bit. So, yeah, you're not getting across that river until 4 o'clock in the morning or so. And then you're marching. They're not, and this is totally, the plan was right to have have everybody across by midnight. It just takes, logistics are what they are. The the storm is so powerful, we should say, that the other two elements of Washington's plan, Cadwalder and Ewing, neither one is able to cross the river. Neither one's able to get in position for the time of this battle. So Washington's not undeterred. In fact, at one point, one of the officers says, these muskets in the storm, they're going to be unusable. And Washington said, we'll take the city by the bayonet then. This is it. He knows the revolution is on the line right here and then. He will march into the city with bayonets, and victory or die is what he's thinking at this point. Every account, and there's many individual soldiers' accounts of seeing Washington like up close and personal, asking questions of the soldiers. Where do you see pickets? Okay, over there. And say, stay here, your officers. Move forward, men. All, constantly active, constantly commanding, and being the stern figure. And one soldier's asked by him, where are the Hessian patrols? And he doesn't know who he is. He said, you don't have to worry, sir. It is General Washington who asked you the question. Oh, sir, yes. It's very motivating, of course, to see this man, and it informs the truth. But it's going to be Washington's army alone, 2,400, that are going to make this march now in the morning, really what becomes the day after Christmas, and hope to surprise the Hessians at Trenton. They don't know what condition the Hessians are going to be. You hear all this talk sometimes about, they were, he expected them to be partying and then they'd be, in a condition where they couldn't fight. But he didn't know that he was going to be attacking in the morning. He thought he was going to attack right in the middle of the celebrations, perhaps, or even before they got started. So it's, it's something of a mistake to say that. He did know he was attacking during a holiday when the enemy might be off, and he did know that he was attacking during a storm.
And so when Washington's army arrives in Trenton, what do they find?
The first thing that they, Rahl has, despite his calling them country clowns, he has put up a few pickets. So you have Andreas Wiederholt, who's going to write a memoir and later blame Rahl for everything, as everyone else will do, because the prince is going to look into all of this. But there's going to be court martials and hearings and things like that. But he has some patrols around the area of Trenton, but they're small. And indeed, actually, Washington gets very mad when some of his soldiers attack the one of the patrols. Like, you're going to warn them. But as we discussed earlier, what really happens is when word of that happens, some of the Hessians are, that was the Jersey militia attack that they talked about. So that's over. And it actually creates, again, he gets many lucky breaks, Washington, in this, and some unlucky ones too. But Washington's troops set up and are able to get their cannon. And this is a young New Yorker, previously from the Caribbean, student in Columbia named Alexander Hamilton. And also some of John Sullivan's men are able to set up cannons on the top of King Street.
Here are a few of my favorite contemporary descriptions of Alexander Hamilton. Quote, I noticed a youth, a mere stripling, small, slender, almost delicate in frame, marching beside a piece of artillery with a cocked hat pulled down over his eyes, apparently lost in thought, with his hand resting on a cannon, and every now and then patting it as if it were a favorite horse or a pet plaything. Another one is by a friend who was there at Princeton. Quote, well do I recollect the day when Hamilton's company marched into Princeton. It was a model of discipline. At their head was a boy, and I wondered at his youth. But what was my surprise when that slight figure was pointed out to me as that Hamilton of whom we had already heard so much.
And right there in Trenton today, there is a monument there, and that's the spot where the cannons were set up. When you're in the high ground and you have cannons set up, I mean, this just brings a smile to Washington's face, which was rare, and during a battle particularly, and that he knows that he's set up, and he starts hearing those pounders go, and the Americans start firing. And now, finally, the Hessians are, in a sense, woken up. I mean, before the patrols could even get back to town, it's really the American shots that wake most of the Hessians up, not their own systems. And, of course, the Hessians should get a little more credit than sometimes in history. They're not just surprised and give up. They do try to mount a defense. They do get, soldiers coming out, but they have to do this all under a withering fire. And it's very hard, even for the best trained troops that His Majesty has, to form lines and to get cannon going under enemy fire. And something else happens. Some of the residents in Trenton are firing from their houses. They don't very much like these Hessians either.
So we know this famous crossing where Washington pulls off this amazing feat at Trenton. But there's a second time. This is not just one time that he crosses it. He goes back over a couple of days later, and they go into Princeton. And there, it's a great battle. I mean, it's not as quick and decisive as it was at Trenton, but with Washington in this is his man Hamilton, the guy he's watching, and shortly thereafter going to invite to be a part of his inner circle. Mm-hmm. Hamilton had stolen cannon in New York from the British, and many cannon to be had. So Hamilton is not only good at it; he's got the cannon. He's with Washington during the battle. A cannonball smashes through one of the buildings on Princeton's campus. And apparently, if you go to Princeton, the story that they tell is that during the battle, somebody, probably Alexander Hamilton, they say, saw a picture of King George III hanging inside the window. And as, basically to show him what he thought of him, fired a cannonball through that building. But I think the better story is this. A couple years earlier, Hamilton had applied to Princeton, and they didn't let him in.
Yes.
And Hamilton was known to be kind of a petty guy. And I think with, a couple decades of history following to know about Hamilton, the chip on his shoulder, and knowing he was there and knowing he had cannon, I think that while we could not establish in a court of law that he did it, I think the evidence says that dude was mad. So all I'm saying is be careful who you don't let into college,
That's right.
Oh, that's a great one. That's a great one.
And now we live in a time where people, forge pictures of their children playing activities that they never participated in, spend hundreds of thousands of dollars just to get into Princeton.
Yeah, and to pay millions of dollars to forge documents to get their kids into universities.
Yeah.
So, just saying, I don't know. Is it better to let that happen and not have more cannonballs smashing through buildings? As someone who works on a campus, I don't know.
And it's real important to bring up Princeton because Trenton, the Trenton battle that we talked about earlier, really sets up Princeton. And Princeton is the cherry on the sundae that really makes the whole series of battles, really 3 battles here, that there's 2 Trentons really, and then there's Princeton, that really makes it a huge victory and frees New Jersey of British, allows Washington to camp instead of on the Allegheny Mountains, across the Alleghenies, to camp in Morristown and really right in the middle of the country and assume the role of a general defending his country instead of a retreater.
So one account I read is during the battle itself, the storm was at the Americans' backs and in the faces of the enemy. Another account I read, house-to-house combat.
It was housed. That's exactly right, because where the barracks are still today. So the many of the Germans are in their barracks or in various houses, and as they're being called out, they're coming out of houses with their muskets and trying to form lines and regiments. It's over, within an hour or so. I mean, there's an attempt, and one of the things, the reason that Washington wanted a 3-prong attack was to not allow the Hessians to retreat. Because if you're just going to fire a few shots at them and they're just going to leave Trenton, for the American army, just capturing Trenton isn't really much, especially with large British and German forces nearby that could just swoop down. You really want to capture the enemy, have a significant victory, and trap them. And luckily, Sullivan's troops are able to do what was planned for Cadwalder to do, which was to lock up the Hessians' route of retreat at Assunpink Creek, south of where Washington's position is. So they're able to sneak around during this battle, prevent their escape. They still try to escape, but it's swampy land that they have to go through.
A 45-minute battle, 900 prisoners, 6 pieces of artillery are taken.
That's the artillery is
Hugely
everything
important.
in the Revolutionary War. On the continental side, they desperately need every supply that they get. There's a huge propaganda advantage in capturing these famed Hessians and taking so many prisoners. Some do leave. There's going to be Hessians, by the way, that despite the great honor that they have in their fighting and everything, are going to look at America and say, yeah, I think I want to stay here instead of going back to my crowded little principality across the ocean. And also Americans are encouraging this. German Americans in particular, who can speak the language, are encouraging. So you do have several thousand Hessians that just enter American life and never go back.
They become part of the melting pot. So this is history. This is the fabled story that you and I grew up hearing, a couple kids growing up in New Jersey.
I think there's so many other things to say about Trenton. I mean, one of them is that you have Washington, you have Hamilton fighting in it, you have Henry Knox, you also have James Monroe, who gets wounded in this battle, a future president.
Didn't Colonel Rahl die?
Yes. During the 45-minute battle, as he's organizing troops, and this is the thing back then where the generals fought right alongside the soldiers, and Americans were good riflemen. The Americans are actually targeting officers. It's just part of their strategy because they knew if you can get into the command structure, they're not going to know what to do anymore. And that was what Trenton was all about. Washington ends up with 2 more victories after this by confounding opponents in a similar way. But you're absolutely right. Rahl is hit while trying to rouse the troops. He is taken to a Methodist church. He surrenders before he dies. Some of the accounts from the Hessian side, I look at it with a little bit of a careful eye because this is a big deal in Hesse-Cassel, and the prince wants a total review of everything. There's a court-martial held, but generally the officers do. What would you do in this situation, right? They generally blame it on Rahl. He is the commanding officer after all, and how much of it is true, like Andreas Wiederhalt talks to Washington. They actually dine after his capture, and they talk about the battle. It's kind of an interesting thing, right? And Wiederhalt, he writes a memoir, and he talks about how he, explained how bad Rahl was and why he didn't have enough patrols and things. Related to that, one of the other things to think about in the Revolutionary War and the Hessians is it puts an end to that practice of the Hessians having a mercenary force. The Revolutionary War is just about the end of it. They lose a lot of men, much more than they're used to losing. It's bloody and painful for the people in Hesse-Cassel and the other parts of Germany.
That's really fascinating. So is that why they put an end to that practice, or did it just kind of fall out of vogue?
No, it was the Revolutionary War. It was a huge contributor. These losses were staggering. And at a certain point, Howe asks London for more troops after Trenton and after the forage wars, which I'd love to spend a minute about, but that occur after this, because it really puts Trenton in the context that it should be, not just kind of one fluky victory, but part of a concerted campaign in New Jersey. And also the idea of America as a country, even then, is New Jersey as a country. We're not going to allow a foreign force, which really at this time, whether it was in Concord or here in the Jerseys, the British were intruding. They were not welcome. They were here in violation of the Continental Congress's edicts and in violation of American rights. They were a foreign force to be repelled. Washington had no interest in letting them occupy the country. The British goal was to garrison New Jersey. And because of Trenton and Princeton, and then some battles afterwards, the Americans are going to knock the British out of Hackensack. They're going to take Morristown without a fight. They're going to attack Elizabethtown. And the British were only able to keep troops in Perth Amboy and New Brunswick, where they had their center. Washington wanted to take that. He said if he had 800 more troops after Princeton, he could have taken New Brunswick and possibly ended the war. They couldn't garrison New Jersey in the way that they planned. They wanted to have New York and then have little groups of British troops all around the state of New Jersey. Washington instructed the militia, the Continentals, that every British force must be attacked at all times. It was never a welcome country for them.
And this is what David Hackett Fisher says. He argues that the British were spread thin, they were trying to cover so much territory in Jersey, they just couldn't do it.
There's a force in Hackensack that nearly starves. And we don't think of Hackensack. Hackensack is by car 10 minutes from New York, but not in those days. They just nearly starved and had to leave their post. And they're also getting sniped at. This is really all over New Jersey, including South Jersey. The local militias were having a field day all through 77. This just allowed the Americans to really have a chance in this war. I mean, there's still going to be a lot of bad points for Washington after Trenton. It's not like after Trenton everything was rosy. No, you have 6 more years of the British occupying New York. I mean, so it's a long time, and there's going to be huge defeats at Charleston, at Savannah. Washington's going to have terrible defeats in Philadelphia, at Germantown, and Brandywine. But he saved the revolution at that moment and created a powerful political statement that the British were unwelcome, that America is a country, we're going to not allow you free pass in our land, and that a continental force, a united American force of all the states can defeat the British.
I'm sure it did wonders for the re-enlistment numbers.
Actually, yeah, I mean, see, the enlistments are up on December 31st, right after the Battle of Trenton, and Washington literally does one of these things where he draws the line in the dirt. Will you be with me? And many men extend their enlistments. Also, many men, particularly from New England, join after Trenton because now they realize this is a cause. There's still going to be a terrible time for many of those Revolutionary War soldiers. Valley Forge is coming the next year. So
I was just going to say that. Valley. So, Bruce, it's always a treat to connect with you.
Oh, it's always my pleasure to be on Road to Now. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you for listening to The Road to Now. If you enjoyed this episode, please tell the world by giving us 5 stars and a review on Apple Podcasts or 5 stars on Spotify. Or spread the word directly. Just text a friend maybe or share a link on social media. Anything helps and we appreciate it. And if you've got a friend who hasn't gotten into podcasts yet, let them know they can hear us every weekend on SiriusXM's POTUS channel 124. Now is the time when we say our special thanks to our supporters on Patreon and give a shout out to our Washingtonians. That list is Tanya Marsh, Mary Hawking, Tim and Caitlin Wells, Fig White, Matt Williams, Team Martin, Ann Williams and Frank Edwards, Nate Farrer, Jennifer and Magnolia, Chris and Teresa Adams, Joy Avery, Edward Carlson, and Aaron and Derek Garrison. Thanks to all you guys for supporting us. If you want to support our work and maybe get on that list, you can join us on Patreon at patreon.com/theroadtonow. You'll get extended versions of select conversations, extra episodes, bonus materials, and more. That's all available at patreon.com/theroadtonow. For more on the show, visit our website, theroadtonow.com, where you can easily search our back catalog and quickly find links to content. Why is it so good? 7 Ages Design. That's who made it. If you're looking for a website, go check them out. The Road to Now is hosted and produced by Bob Crawford and me, Ben Sawyer. Our associate producer is Gary Fletcher. This episode was edited by Ben Sawyer, and our theme music, like pretty much always, was by Paul DeFiglia. For Bob Crawford, this is Ben Sawyer. Thank you for listening. Take care.